I'm Jenna, 34 years old. Even after 7 years of marriage to Nathan, I've never truly felt like part of his family. Last summer, during their annual backyard cookout, I hoped, just maybe, things would be different. But Nathan's sister, Felicity, had other ideas. As everyone gathered around the picnic table, I tried to share an update about a recent graphic design project. Felicity cut in with a smirk and said, "If you vanished tomorrow, I doubt anyone would notice." The whole table burst into laughter, even Nathan. I didn't flinch. I simply raised my hot dog, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "Challenge accepted." That same night, I packed my things and left. Nathan and I first met during our final year of university. I was juggling a part-time job at a cafe while studying graphic design. He was finishing up his business degree, fully funded by his parents. We struck up a conversation one late night as he grabbed a coffee and noticed the book I was reading. Everything moved fast from there. 3 months later, we were inseparable. By graduation, he proposed with a ring worth more than all my student loans combined. I was captivated by his wit, his confidence, and what I believed was sincere love. When we married a year later, I thought I was gaining not just a husband, but a whole new family. The Harringtons were nothing like the family I came from. Wealthy, well-connected, and bonded in their own selective way. Nathan's father, Edward, had built a marketing firm from scratch. His mother, Margaret, orchestrated their social life like a 5-star event planner while juggling 3 charity boards. His sister, Felicity, was already a junior executive in the family company by the time she turned 27. His younger brother, Lucas, was the so-called rebel, yet somehow still landed a cushy job at their uncle's investment firm. My background was a stark contrast. I was raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My sister Nina and I shared a room until I moved out for college. Holidays meant potluck dinners with neighbors and handmade presents. The first time I stepped into the Harringtons' massive colonial-style home, I felt like I'd stumbled onto a film set. The class differences weren't spoken out loud, but they were always there. Margaret would praise my design projects like they were charming arts and crafts. Edward explained simple business concepts to me over dinner, ignoring the fact that I'd run my own freelance studio long before I met Nathan. Felicity constantly corrected my pronunciation of wines and fashion brands, always with that syrupy smile. "They mean well," Nathan would insist whenever I brought up how uncomfortable it made me. "Felicity's just trying to help you feel included." But Felicity's version of love always felt more like slow, polite cruelty. At our wedding, her maid of honor speech included multiple tales about Nathan's exes. When we bought our first house, she questioned whether the neighborhood was Harrington appropriate. When I landed a major client, she casually wondered aloud if I'd been hired because of my last name. Still, I kept trying. God, how I tried. I pitched in at Margaret's charity events. I sent clients to Edward's firm. I never forgot a birthday. I laughed at inside jokes that left me feeling stung. I changed how I dressed for family occasions, picked up their slang, and bit my tongue whenever the talk turned to second homes and elite prep schools. For the first few years, I kept my freelance design business running. Small, steady, respected. But then Nathan was offered a career expansion that involved constant travel. It was just assumed I'd scale back my work to manage things at home. I didn't protest. My client list shrank. My days grew quieter. My world shrank to Nathan's occasional presence and the ever-hovering shadow of his family's judgment. Last spring, I lost a pregnancy at 11 weeks. The physical pain was unbearable. The emotional toll was worse. Nathan was away in Boston for a conference. He said he'd fly home, but seemed almost relieved when I told him I could handle it. Margaret sent flowers with a note that read, "Maybe it's for the best, until things are more stable." Felicity hinted that the stress from my little design business might have contributed. Only Nina came. She brought soup, held me while I cried, and didn't let go. The contrast hit hard. My sister's warmth versus the Harringtons' cold politeness cracked something deep inside me. But I buried it. By the time the summer cookout rolled around, I felt like a shell of myself. My work had turned robotic. My friendships had faded. My marriage felt like a stage performance. Still, a small part of me clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different, that I'd finally be accepted. The Harringtons' annual BBQ was a neighborhood spectacle. Margaret spent weeks crafting the menu. Edward displayed his newest grilling gear. Family friends and business partners mingled on their perfect lawn. It was more than a party. It was a status statement, an affirmation of who belonged and who didn't. Despite my years as Nathan's wife, I knew exactly which category I was. And that morning, I spent 3 hours baking my grandmother's strawberry shortcake, the only dish that had ever earned real praise at one of these events. Nathan was buried in calls, sorting out final details for his upcoming Tokyo trip. As we rushed out the door, he reminded me, "Dad's showing off his new smoker today. Try to seem impressed, even if you don't get it." I nodded, clutching the cake carrier on my lap, my floral sundress, chosen specifically to match Margaret's. Casual elegance vibe, already feeling tight in the shoulders. When we arrived, the place was buzzing. Caterers navigated through groups of guests. Edward stood proudly on the patio, surrounded by admirers, showing off his latest smoker. Margaret floated through the crowd, laughing like glassware chiming. Then Felicity spotted us. "Nathan!" she chirped, planting a fake kiss on his cheek. She glanced at me. "Jenna, that dress is so cheerful." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "The kitchen's crowded, but I'm sure you'll find a spot for your dish." Before I could respond, she linked her arm through Nathan's and whisked him away, chatting about someone from his college days. I stood there alone, dessert in hand, scanning for a familiar face. Eventually, I made my way to the kitchen, where Margaret was instructing the staff like a general. "Oh, Jenna, how sweet of you," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "You really didn't need to bring anything. We've got the bakery handling dessert." She motioned vaguely toward the pantry. "But how thoughtful. Maybe set it in there for now." I placed the shortcake on a crowded shelf already filled, with guest contributions that wouldn't make it to the display. As I turned to leave, I overheard her telling a server to clear space for Felicity's authentic tiramisu right in the center of the dessert table. The next 2 hours passed, in a haze of forced smiles and interrupted conversations. Every time I tried to chat with one of Nathan's cousins, Margaret would whisk them off to meet someone more important. I offered to help set up the buffet, but was told the caterers had a system. I joined a conversation about movies, but couldn't get a word in. Meanwhile, Lucas's wife, Sabrina, married into the family for barely 2 years, was being paraded around like royalty. Margaret introduced her as our Sabrina, the pediatric surgeon. Felicity brought her into inside jokes from vacations she wasn't even part of. Even Edward, usually disinterested, asked in-depth questions about her work. I noticed everything. Nathan's family always referred to Sabrina as our Sabrina, the pediatric surgeon, like she was some gleaming trophy. Felicity even included her in stories from family holidays that happened long before she was around. Even Edward, who barely acknowledged most in-laws, was suddenly full of questions about her career. The contrast was glaring. And ironically, Sabrina looked almost as uneasy with the attention as I did with being ignored. When lunch was finally served, Nathan returned to my side, having spent the morning deep in discussion with Edward and his associates. "Having fun?" he asked casually, not waiting for a response as he guided me toward the buffet. We filled our plates and sat at the long table on the patio. I found myself wedged between Uncle Hugh, who was hard of hearing, and an empty seat reserved for Felicity. Nathan sat across from me, already immersed in a conversation with his father, about business customs in Japan. Felicity eventually arrived. placing her perfectly arranged plate down and instantly pulling everyone's focus with a story about a celebrity at her gym. Sabrina nodded politely, Margaret beamed, and even Hugh leaned in to listen better. During a rare lull, I saw a small opening. "I just wrapped up a branding job for the new bakery downtown," I said. "Their grand opening is next weekend." Felicity's eyes narrowed. "Oh, that place with the gaudy neon sign? I drove past it. Looked a bit tacky." "The design is actually vintage-inspired," I explained calmly. "The owners wanted to reflect the building's history." She cut me off with a theatrical sigh. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. That's how boring this conversation is." The entire table burst into laughter. Margaret giggled behind her napkin. Edward let out a hearty chuckle. Even Nathan laughed, reaching for his drink. Hugh, probably unaware of what was said, chuckled along with everyone else. The sound around me felt like cold water, sharp and numbing. My face flushed with heat while my hands went ice cold. 7 years of quiet slights and masked insults clicked into sudden, painful focus. But I didn't cry. I didn't storm off or create a scene for them to label me dramatic. I simply raised my hot dog like a glass in a toast, met Felicity's eyes, and said with crystal clarity, "Challenge accepted." For a moment, silence fell. Felicity's smile twitched. Nathan glanced between us, sensing a shift he couldn't name. Then Margaret clapped her hands lightly and chirped, "Who's ready for Edward to carve the brisket?" And just like that, the moment passed. For the rest of the afternoon, I watched, not participated. I observed how effortlessly they fit into a world built on shared privilege and unspoken rules. Nathan moved among them like he belonged, offering me only the occasional distracted smile. I mentally cataloged every subtle exclusion and dismissal, every time I was talked over or brushed aside. And then, beneath it all, that quiet voice inside, muted for years, finally grew loud enough to hear, "You deserve better." By the time we packed up to leave, I had made my decision. The only thing left was figuring out how to carry it out. The car ride home was silent. Nathan scrolled through emails on his phone, reading aloud bits about his Tokyo itinerary. I stared out the window, mapping my next steps behind a blank expression. We pulled into the driveway. He finally noticed. "You've been off since lunch. Everything okay?" I took a breath. Felicity's comment, about me disappearing. "Did you think that was funny?" Nathan sighed and unbuckled his seatbelt. "Don't start. You know how Felicity gets at these things." "You laughed," I said softly. "It was a joke, Jenna. You don't have to overanalyze everything." He got out of the car, ending the conversation. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying not just the BBQ, but our entire marriage. I remembered the woman I used to be, confident, creative, passionate about my work. I remembered the way I connected with friends, the joy I found in creating. Somewhere along the line, I'd started to believe the Harringtons' quiet message, that I was only as valuable as their approval, that being included meant being small. At 2 a.m., I slipped out of bed and into my office. I opened my laptop and began researching bank balances, apartments in Seattle, where Nina lived, train schedules, flight options. By dawn, I had a rough plan. Nathan left for golf with Edward later that morning, kissing me on the cheek without really looking at me. As soon as his car left the driveway, I got to work. My first call was to Jessica, my college roommate, one of the few people who'd stayed in touch through the years. "I need a big favor," I said. "Name it," she replied without hesitation. "Me. Leaving Nathan today. Can you help me pack?" 2 hours later, Jessica arrived with coffee, boxes, and unwavering determination. We worked methodically. I chose only what mattered: clothes, documents, irreplaceable mementos, and my design tools. "You can store anything else at my place," Jessica offered, gently wrapping a framed photo of my mother and me. While she packed, I handled the financial details. I moved exactly half of our joint savings to my account. No more, no less. I paid my share of the bills due that month. I listed all the subscriptions and services I'd need to change or cancel. By afternoon, my car was full. What remained of my life in tidy boxes. Jessica gave me a long hug before heading off. Call me when you're safe, and Jenna, I'm proud of you. Alone in the house we'd shared for 5 years, I wrote Nathan a letter. It was brief. I said I needed time to reconsider our marriage, that I'd only taken what was mine and covered the bills I owed. I asked for space. No contact. I didn't say where I was going. I slipped off my wedding ring and placed it on top of the letter. Next to it, I left a printed copy of Felicity's comment, word for word, with the date and time, just so he wouldn't forget. Before I left, I allowed myself one moment. I picked up our wedding photo from the hall table. We looked so happy then, full of hope. Nathan's smile reached his eyes. Mine sparkled with confidence I no longer recognized. Goodbye, I whispered, setting the photo back in place. I walked out without looking back. The drive out of the neighborhood was surreal. I was terrified. But with every mile, the weight on my chest lifted. By the time I crossed the state line, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. That night, I checked into a simple hotel using the emergency credit card I'd kept hidden throughout our marriage. The room wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I texted both Jessica and Nina to confirm I was safe, then turned off my phone. I slept deeper than I had in months. By morning, the messages had started. Nathan's tone shifted exactly as I expected, confused, then annoyed, then pleading, then angry. Where are you? Call me. This is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk. My mom is worried. You're being incredibly selfish. I leave for Tokyo in 3 days. Fine. Take your space. We'll talk when I get back. He never mentioned Felicity's comment, never acknowledged his own laughter. Not once did he even hint at understanding why I left. I texted my mother a short message. I'm okay. I just need some time alone. Please, don't share anything. Then I turned my phone off again. I opened my laptop and started searching for a longer-term place to stay in Seattle. The challenge had been accepted. Now came the real test. Not just vanishing from the Harringtons' world, but learning to live again outside of it. I was about to find out whether Felicity had been right, if my absence really would go unnoticed, or if I could finally build a life where I mattered. On my terms. I didn't reply to any of them. Not the texts, not the calls, not the carefully phrased voicemails from Nathan's mother pretending to be concerned. Instead, I stayed focused on rebuilding. Jessica mailed the rest of my belongings in plain, unmarked boxes. I found a therapist who specialized in marital trauma and complicated family dynamics. Our weekly sessions left me emotionally drained, but little by little, I felt myself getting stronger. That comment Felicity made at the cookout, Dr. Monroe said in our 3rd session, that wasn't the reason you left. It was just the final straw. I know, I nodded. It was just the last crack in a foundation already crumbling. She leaned in slightly. So, what was the first one? That question cracked something open in me. Out poured the moments I'd pushed down for years, little jabs disguised as helpful advice, professional achievements dismissed, opinions overlooked, all while Nathan stood by. Not actively cruel, but passively complicit in my erasure. By my 2nd month in Seattle, I'd landed 3 steady freelance clients through online platforms. The work wasn't glamorous, mostly ebook formatting and social media layouts, but it paid the bills. And every completed task stitched back a small piece of the confidence I'd lost. One gray Tuesday, I wandered into a cozy coffee shop and paused in front of a mural that took up an entire wall. The colors, the detail. I couldn't. "Look away. Beautiful, right?" the barista said. "The owner commissioned it from a local artist. She's actually looking for someone to redo our menu boards and branding stuff." An hour later, I was sitting across from the owner, Eleanor Marshall. She was in her 50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, and spoke with no fluff. The kind of woman who made you sit up straighter without even trying. "I'm not interested in your resume," she said, waving away the portfolio I'd pulled up on my tablet. "Show me what you design when no one's watching. The work you do because you have to." I hesitated, then opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. It was full of strange, passionate, sometimes impractical designs I'd made just for myself, back when creating still felt like breathing. Eleanor studied each piece silently, occasionally zooming in with a quiet intensity. Finally, she looked up. "You've been hiding," she said. "These are excellent, raw, alive. But nothing recent?" I shook my head. "I haven't made anything like this in a long time." "Why not?" The question was simple, but it hit like a slap, so I told. Just the basics. How I'd lost myself in Nathan's world. How my creative voice had dulled to match the Harringtons' expectations. Eleanor didn't offer sympathy. She nodded once. "You're hired for the menu project," she said. "But there's one condition." "What is it?" "You make one personal piece a week. I don't care if it's finished or messy or weird. Just bring something. Every week. That's your real work." She wasn't just a client. Eleanor quickly became a mentor, blunt when needed, encouraging when I couldn't find my own fire. Through her, I met other small business owners who needed design work. Slowly, my calendar filled again, but this time with projects that made me feel alive instead of depleted. Meanwhile, Nathan's messages trickled down to near silence. When I filed for divorce, the paperwork triggered a wave of missed calls, none of which I returned. Eventually, his lawyer contacted mine, and the process moved forward with cold efficiency. Nathan's initial resistance melted into acceptance. 4. Months after I left, I finally allowed myself to check social media. Nathan had posted photos from a corporate gala, arm around a woman I didn't recognize. Edward shared a post praising the Tokyo launch, proudly tagging his son. Felicity had uploaded pictures from another family dinner with the caption, "Missing. No one." Oddly, it didn't hurt. It confirmed what I already knew. Felicity was right. My absence hadn't made waves. I'd slipped out of their world, and the pond was still. But instead of pain, I felt something else. Freedom. 6 months after I left, my divorce papers came through. Finalized. No alimony, no disputes. Just a clean break, agreed upon by both sides. Nathan sent one personal message with his signature. "I still don't get it, but I won't fight you anymore." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and cut off my long hair, the style Nathan always liked. I gave myself a sleek bob, framing a face I was only beginning to recognize again. There were fine lines now, a leaner frame. But in my eyes, there was finally something steady, clear. By the 8th month, my design business had grown enough to justify renting a desk in a co-working space. Surrounded by other creatives, I remembered what it felt like to be taken seriously, to be challenged, to matter. As the 1-year mark approached, I stopped checking up on the Harringtons. I didn't need to. They were no longer part of my present, only characters from a closed chapter. Meanwhile, my new world bloomed. A branding job I did for a local gourmet food line won regional attention. The coffee shop redesign landed in a lifestyle feature. A casual comment I made during a design workshop got me invited to speak at a creative conference. Exactly 1 year after Felicity's cruel joke, I was no longer invisible. I had built a life where my presence mattered. My voice was no longer ignored. My work no longer dismissed. But the story wasn't done. That's when the email came. Subject line: Seeking designer for national campaign. It was from Westwood Creative. They'd seen my work on the Rainier Artisan Foods project and wanted to talk about a potential campaign for Sheffield Consumer Brands. My breath caught in my throat. Sheffield was a division of the Harrington family's marketing company. Edwards Empire. The connection couldn't be coincidental. I called Eleanor. "It might be legit," she said calmly. "Your last campaign was in 3 trade publications. Word's getting around." "But the timing, the real question, isn't whether they know who you are," she said. "It's whether the work is worth doing, no matter who's behind it." I asked Westwood for more details. The project was huge, an entire rebrand for Sheffield's organic product line, with potential long-term work and a budget double anything I'd handled in Seattle so far. After 3 days of agonizing thought, I said yes. If the Harringtons were behind it, I wanted to face them head-on. And if they weren't, I wouldn't let old ghosts stop me from seizing real growth. At the first meeting, Westwood's creative director Thomas made no mention of my past. We discussed style directions, deadlines, budgets. Everything was professional, neutral, clean. When I asked about client involvement, he only said Sheffield execs would be reviewing major milestones. I accepted the job and made clear boundaries about feedback and communications. 3 weeks passed. Everything went smoothly. Feedback was positive. Timeline stayed on track. No Harrington names popped up. Then came the announcement. Sheffield's new branding would be unveiled at the annual Marketing Innovation Gala, a major industry event. Attendance was strongly encouraged. I knew exactly what that meant. The Harringtons would be there. I brought it up in therapy. "You have 3 options," Dr. Monroe said. "Skip the event and possibly limit your visibility. Attend and try to avoid them. Or attend and be ready to confront them, on your terms." "What would you do?" I asked. She smiled. "I'm more interested in what the Jenna of now would do, not the one from a year ago." That answer followed me all the way home. A year ago I would have skipped it. Or gone in Nathan's shadow, stiff with dread and hoping no one noticed me. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning I RSVP'd yes. Then I booked an appointment with a stylist recommended by Nina and set aside part of my Sheffield advance for an outfit that would do more than just fit in. It would make a statement. When the evening of the gala arrived, I felt oddly calm. I checked my reflection in the hotel mirror. A deep emerald jumpsuit, tailored, bold, nothing like the generic black dresses I used to hide in. My hair, now bobbed and streaked with caramel, framed my face in clean lines. My shoes, my only splurge, added just enough height to make me feel untouchable. But it was my expression that said the most. No fear, no apology, just readiness. The eye. Venue, a restored historic theater, was breathtaking. Soft lighting, modern florals. I checked in, took my name badge, and accepted a glass of the signature cocktail. I'd barely taken a sip when Thomas appeared and began introducing me to executives and editors. We exchanged business cards, chatted about trends and market shifts. And as I spoke, something shifted inside me. I was no longer trying to prove I belonged. I knew I did. I spoke with ease and confidence. My thoughts met not with placating smiles, but with genuine interest and respectful nods. About 40 minutes into the event, I was deep in conversation with a magazine editor when the energy in the room noticeably shifted. I didn't need to turn around. I knew the Harringtons had arrived. Edward's loud, unmistakable laugh confirmed it moments later. Still, I kept my focus, finished my comment on consumer behavior trends, and then politely excused myself to get a drink. At the bar, waiting for my sparkling water, I scanned the room carefully. Edward and Margaret were near the entrance, already surrounded by admirers. I didn't see Felicity right away, but then there was Nathan. He stood a little apart from his parents, looking leaner than I remembered, and somehow smaller. Even in his tailored suit, he looked diminished. Our eyes locked across the room. His expression shifted instantly. Shock, disbelief, lips parting as if to speak. But I didn't break eye contact. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply looked at him steadily, then turned toward the bartender and thanked him for my drink. The first direct encounter came a few minutes later. Edward approached as I was reading the event program. "Jenna," he said evenly, "not warm, not cold, just measured." "Edward," I greeted him with a nod. "A surprise, I'm sure. I didn't realize you were involved with this campaign." "I'm the lead designer for Sheffield's organic rebrand," I said, meeting his gaze without hesitation. His expression faltered for a second, as if thrown off by my composed response. I hadn't connected the dots. I thought Westwood was handling the creative. They are. I'm contracted through Thomas's team. Early testing has shown promising results. I kept my tone professional, confident, and detached. Exactly. "How I'd speak to any executive client." "I see," he replied, reassessing me quietly. "Your work's changed since you left." "Not changed," I corrected with a slight smile. "Just returned to its real direction." He shifted uncomfortably. "Margaret's here somewhere. I'm sure she'd want to say hello." "Course," I said, offering no encouragement but also not refusing. As Edward stepped away, likely to relay the news to the rest of the family, I returned to the Westwood group, seamlessly blending into their conversation about the night's schedule. From the corner of my eye, I saw the reaction ripple across the room. Edward approached Margaret, whose perfectly practiced expression cracked slightly as her eyes scanned for me. The Sheffield presentation was scheduled midway through the evening. Just as Thomas and I headed toward the stage area, Felicity stepped directly into our path. Her expression was a blend of surprise, suspicion, and calculation. "Jenna," she said tightly, "no one told me you were involved in this." "I'm with Westwood Creative," I said calmly. "Thomas, this is Felicity Harrington, Edward's daughter." Thomas extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Harrington. Jenna's been fantastic to work with. You know her work?" Felicity's smile thinned. "We're family." "Or were, I suppose." "How nice." Thomas nodded with polite neutrality. "Well, if you'll excuse us, we need to get ready for the presentation." He didn't ask questions as we walked away, but I felt his silent support. I appreciated his professionalism more than he could know. The presentation itself moved in a fast, focused blur. I spoke about branding principles and emotional consumer connection. I outlined the strategy, explained the visual direction, answered questions clearly and with purpose. The response was overwhelmingly positive, punctuated by spontaneous applause. From the stage, I could see them all in the front row. Margaret's face remained composed. Edward nodded occasionally when I highlighted certain figures. Felicity leaned over to whisper to the woman beside her, her expression unreadable. But it was Nathan's stare that stood out, unblinking, intense. He never took his eyes off me. Once the presentation ended, a wave of attendees swarmed in with questions and compliments. Business cards were exchanged, conversations sparked, follow-up opportunities floated. This success, earned completely on my own terms, was the sweetest kind of vindication. Eventually, as the room shifted toward dinner, I began gathering my things. That's when Nathan finally approached. Alone. "You look good," he said, hands buried awkwardly in his pockets. "Thank you," I replied evenly. "I didn't know you were living in Seattle." "That was by design." He nodded, accepting that. "Your presentation, it was excellent. You've always been talented. I still am, I said gently, keeping it in the present tense. He looked down, then back up, a rare honesty in his expression. I've had a lot of time to think, about everything. Felicity's comment. Everything before that. At the time, I didn't get it. But this past year, it's been clarifying. I'm glad to hear that. I miss you. The words floated between us. Once I would have clung to them. Now they felt distant, irrelevant. There was no triumph in his pain, no satisfaction in his regret, only peace in my clarity. I need to rejoin my team for dinner, I said, calm and final. Are you attending tomorrow's workshop? Yes, I'm speaking on digital integration. Maybe we could grab a coffee after? I paused, measured my own boundaries. I can give you half an hour. A flicker of relief crossed his face. Thank you. As I turned to go, Margaret suddenly appeared beside him, her signature social smile firmly in place. Jenna, darling, she cooed. What an absolute joy to see you doing so well. Her words were rehearsed. Her tone betrayed a thread of discomfort. Margaret, I acknowledged. Hope you're doing well. We've missed you at family gatherings, she continued smoothly. No one makes strawberry shortcake quite like yours. The old me would have swallowed the bait. The new me smiled pleasantly. That's odd. I remember my shortcake being shelved in the pantry while Felicity's tiramisu took center stage. Margaret's smile faltered, just for a second. Must have been a mix-up. Of course, I said sweetly. Just one of many. I'm fortunate now to work in spaces where those kinds of misunderstandings are rare. Before she could respond, the event coordinator called everyone to dinner. I excused myself with polite finality and took my seat with the Westwood team, on the opposite side of the ballroom from the Harringtons. The rest of the evening passed without further contact. I caught Nathan looking at me a few more times, but I didn't return the glance. When the dinner ended, the team invited me out for drinks. I declined. I preferred the quiet of my hotel room. Back in my room, I slipped off my heels and stood by the window, gazing over the glowing skyline. The confrontation I'd once feared was now behind me, and I felt stronger, not drained. I hadn't shown up as Nathan's wife. I hadn't come as an outsider desperate to belong. I came as a whole person, as a professional who no longer needed anyone's permission to take up space. Felicity's words had sparked my disappearance. The ultimate irony was this. By leaving their world, I had finally stepped fully into my own. The morning sun streamed through the curtains. I dressed with purpose, sipping room service coffee while reviewing my workshop slides. The Sheffield workshop was held in the hotel's conference rooms, far more relaxed than the previous night's gala. As I set up my materials, I spotted Edward, speaking with Thomas near the refreshments. Their exchange looked businesslike, but calm. Occasionally, Edward gestured toward the product displays. Attendees began filtering in, chatting over coffee and muffins. I was checking my notes one last time when Felicity entered, scanning the room until her gaze locked onto mine. After a moment's hesitation, she approached, clutching her coffee a little too tightly. "Good morning," she offered neutrally. "Thomas speaks highly of your work." "He's a strong creative director," I replied. "The whole Westwood team has been excellent." She shifted slightly. "I didn't realize you'd built a career here in Seattle. Last night's presentation was impressive. Coming from Felicity, that was basically a standing ovation." "Thank you," I said calmly. "Dad's thinking about moving the Sheffield account fully in-house," she added, watching me closely. "He's very happy with the campaign direction." I understood the message loud and clear. If they took Sheffield in-house, they could claim the credit, erase my involvement. The flicker of doubt inside me didn't last long. "That would be his decision, of course," I replied evenly. "As Sheffield's parent company, he has that right, but Westwood's contracts are very specific about creative attribution. Thomas is meticulous when it comes to protecting his team's work. Felicity's expression stiffened, almost imperceptibly. Before she could reply, the facilitator called the room to order. Our exchange ended with a pair of formal, professional nods, a far cry from the last time we'd spoken, standing over a picnic table and a tray of hot dogs while she hurled barbed insults. The morning's workshop sessions unfolded with smooth precision, presentations on audience research, behavioral, targeting, and market trends. My segment, on digital integration, was scheduled just before lunch. As I stepped to the podium, I noticed Nathan slipping into the back of the room, clearly having timed his entrance to catch my talk. I presented with calm authority, explaining how our packaging designs incorporated augmented reality features and connected seamlessly with the larger brand ecosystem. The Q&A session that followed was dynamic, full of sharp, insightful questions. When Edward asked about rollout timelines, I answered with confidence, citing the concrete benchmarks we'd already established with Sheffield. As the attendees began to disperse for lunch, Nathan started making his way toward me. But before he could reach me, a Sheffield executive caught his attention, asking something urgent. I took the opportunity to slip outside for a moment of quiet. The hotel's courtyard garden offered a peaceful break. I found a bench and had just settled in when Margaret appeared on the path, her expression suggesting our encounter was no coincidence. "You always had good instincts for disappearing at the right time," she said, smoothing her skirt as she sat beside me uninvited. "I prefer to think of it as recognizing when I need a breather," I replied evenly. She studied me with new focus. "You've changed." "I've returned," I corrected, "to the person I was before I started molding myself to fit places I never belonged." She exhaled lightly. "Families are complicated, Jenna, especially long-standing ones like ours. There are customs, traditions, expectations." "I know," I said. "I spent 7 years studying them, and 7 years trying to meet those expectations." "Maybe we weren't as warm as we should have been," she admitted. It was the closest I'd ever heard her come to an apology. But leaving like that, without warning, it was rather theatrical, don't you think? I turned to look at her directly. "I left Nathan a detailed letter. I made sure the finances were settled. I handled it all as an adult who had spent years being quietly hurt. There was nothing dramatic about it." "He was devastated," she murmured. "He was disrupted," I replied gently. "There's a difference." Her polished composure cracked for a second. "You don't know what this past year has been like for him, for any of us." "You're right. And you don't know what the previous 7 were like for me." We sat in silence for a beat, tension thick in the air. "But I'm not here to tally pain points, Margaret," I continued. "I'm here because I'm excellent at what I do, and Sheffield's campaign benefits from my contribution." There was a shift in her expression. Not full respect, but a glimmer of something close. A recognition. "You were always determined," she said. "Stubborn," I corrected with a smile. "Let's call it what it is." As we made our way back to the conference center, she asked unexpectedly, "Will you be attending the dinner tonight?" "Yes, Westwood has a table." She nodded thoughtfully. "The salmon is usually quite good." The remark was so benign, so typical, like any mother-in-law making idle small talk. For a moment, I felt unbalanced by its ordinariness. I gave a vague sound of agreement as we separated, returning to our respective tables. The afternoon sessions were focused on deployment strategy. I engaged professionally, present, involved, but never lingering near the Harringtons. I neither sought them out nor avoided them. I'd learned how to take up my own space. As the day wrapped up, Nathan finally managed to catch me. "Still up for coffee?" he asked, uncertainty threading his voice. "I am," I said. "There's a place in the lobby." We walked quietly, sitting side by side, our drinks, His Americano, my latte, were ordered without discussion. The familiarity of that moment was both jarring and oddly comforting. "Seattle suits you," he said after a pause. "It does. The creative scene is more open than I expected." "Supportive?" He traced the edge of his cup. "I've been in therapy since you left." Dad thought, "It was a waste of time, but it's helped." I blinked. Nathan had always waved off therapy as self-indulgent. "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "My therapist helped me see things about our marriage, about my role, about how I avoided seeing what was happening because it was easier not to." His directness surprised me. For a moment, I saw the man I had once loved, capable of reflection, maybe even growth. "Thank you for saying that," I told him. "I didn't defend you," he continued. "Not from Felicity, not from my mother, not even from myself. I just expected you to bend, to adjust. And when you didn't, you didn't know what to do," I finished for him. "No, you didn't. I keep thinking about that cookout, about what Felicity said, and how we all laughed. Even me." He paused. "When you said challenge accepted, I didn't realize that was you breaking free." There was admiration in his voice now. Regret, too. We ended up talking for nearly an hour, well beyond the time I'd initially offered. He told me how things had changed in the family, how Felicity's barbs were now directed at his new girlfriend, how Margaret had tightened her grip over events, how Edward had been disappointed when Nathan turned down a promotion that required relocating. "I feel like someone turned up the contrast on a photo I've been looking at my whole life," he said. "Everything's clearer now." When our cups were empty, we both recognized that it was time. "Is there any chance for us?" he asked. "Maybe not now, but eventually?" I studied his face. Once, it had been my home. Now, I saw it with affection, but no longing. The bond had been broken, not only by Felicity's cruelty, but by a year of healing, a year of rediscovering myself. "I think we both needed to change," I said softly. "And I like the person I'm becoming now." He nodded, with quiet acceptance. "You were always stronger than I gave you credit for." "We both were," I said. "We just needed different soil to grow in." We shared a brief, platonic hug. It felt like true closure. Watching him walk away, I realized I wished him well. Not as my husband, but as someone finally learning to stand apart from his family's shadow. The final confrontation came as I was gathering my materials from the conference room. Felicity entered, her stride purposeful, her eyes locked on me. "I need to ask you something," she said without preface. "And I'd like an honest answer." "All right," I said, intrigued despite myself. "Did you take this project because it was connected to us?" "No," I said simply. "I didn't realize the Sheffield campaign had ties to your family until after I'd signed the contract." She studied me, weighing my words. "And once you knew, you didn't step away?" "Why would I?" I asked, calm and unbothered. "I was the best person for the job. That your family might benefit from my work is a side effect, not a motive. So you just happened to reappear, exactly a year later, on a project tied to us?" I smiled. Life doesn't usually deliver such neat symmetry, but yes, essentially. "I don't believe in coincidences that neat," she said sharply. "What would the alternative be?" I asked lightly. "That I spent a year building a new career in a new city, forging connections, taking gigs, just to end up here? Do you really think you occupy that much space in my life?" That hit her. Felicity blinked, perhaps realizing for the first time that she wasn't the center of my story. "At the cookout," she began again, her voice quieter this time. Our conversation ended with a pair of calm, professional nods, a far cry from that moment a year ago filled with hot dogs, sarcasm, and invisible lines drawn across a picnic table. The rest of the morning sessions moved along efficiently, covering market analysis and audience segmentation. My own presentation, focused on digital integration, was scheduled just before the lunch break. As I stepped up to the podium, I noticed Nathan slipping into the back row, clearly having timed his entrance to coincide with my segment. I presented with clarity and confidence, walking through how the new packaging included augmented reality, features and integrated seamlessly into Sheffield's broader digital ecosystem. The Q&A afterward was animated and insightful. When Edward asked about our rollout timeline, I responded with clearly defined benchmarks already agreed upon with the Sheffield team. As people began filtering out for lunch, Nathan tried to approach me, but a Sheffield executive caught him for a side conversation. I used the moment to slip away, seeking quiet in the hotel courtyard. The garden offered a welcome break. I found a bench, enjoying the quiet, when Margaret suddenly appeared. From the expression on her face, I could tell she hadn't stumbled upon me by accident. "You've always had a gift for disappearing just when things get overwhelming," she said, adjusting her skirt as she sat beside me uninvited. "I like to think of it as knowing when I need space," I replied. She studied me more closely than she ever had before. "You've changed." "No," I said. "I've returned to who I was before I tried shrinking myself to fit where I didn't belong." She sighed, almost wistfully. "Family dynamics can be complicated, especially in families like ours. There are expectations, ways of doing things." "I'm well aware," I said. "I spent 7 years learning those unspoken rules. 7 years trying to follow them. Maybe we didn't make it easy for you," she admitted. It was the nearest to an apology I'd ever received from her. "But vanishing the way you did, don't you think that was a bit much?" I turned to face her fully. I left a clear letter. I handled my responsibilities. I made a decision, not a scene. There was nothing over the top about it. Nathan was devastated. "No," I said gently. "He was inconvenienced. There's a difference." Margaret's carefully held expression faltered. "You don't know what this past year has been like for him, or for the rest of us. And you don't know what the 7 before that were like for me." We sat in silence before I continued. "But I'm not here to compete over suffering. I'm here because I do good work, because I bring value to Sheffield's campaign. That's it." Something shifted in her gaze. Not exactly admiration, but perhaps a deeper recognition. "You always were persistent. Let's just call it what it is. Stubborn," I said with a small smile. As we made our way back to the conference area, she asked, "Will you be attending the closing dinner tonight?" "Yes." "Westwood has a table." She nodded. "The salmon's usually quite good." It was such an ordinary comment, the kind someone's mother-in-law might say in passing. And yet, it landed strangely, like something normal in the middle of something extraordinary. I murmured agreement, and we returned to our seats. The afternoon sessions focused on implementation logistics. I participated fully, keeping a polite distance from the Harringtons without deliberately avoiding them. As the workshop ended, Nathan finally caught up with me. "Still up for that coffee?" he asked, a note of hesitation in his voice. "Sure," I said. "There's a cafe downstairs." We walked together in silence, familiar, yet no longer intimate. We ordered our usuals, his Americano, my latte, without needing to ask, and sat in a quiet corner. "Seattle suits you," he said after a while. "It does. I've found a community that values creativity without all the expectations." He stared at his cup. "I've been going to therapy." That caught me off guard. Nathan had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary. "Good," I said sincerely. "It's helped, a lot. I've realized how blind I was, not intentionally, but I didn't want to see what you were going through. It was easier not to." I studied him. For the first time in a long time, he looked vulnerable and honest. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I didn't stand up for you," he continued. "Not to Felicity, not to my mom, not even to myself. I just assumed you'd adapt. That you'd mold yourself into what we needed. You didn't," I replied, without anger, just truth. "I keep thinking about that day at the barbecue, the way you raised your hot dog and said, 'Challenge accepted.' I didn't get it then. I do now. That was you taking your life back." There was admiration in his voice now, and regret. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. Nathan shared how things had changed, how Felicity now criticized his new girlfriend, how Margaret had tightened her grip on family matters, how Edward had been frustrated when Nathan declined a job transfer. "It's like I'm finally seeing my family for what they are," he said. "Like someone adjusted the lighting and now I can see every corner." As our drinks emptied, we both felt the shift. The end of the conversation. "Is there any chance for us?" he asked. "Not now. Maybe someday?" I looked at him, this man I had once loved. There was care, even warmth, but no pull. "I think we both had to become someone new," I said. "And I like who I am now." He nodded slowly. "You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for." "We both were," I said. "We just needed different conditions to realize it." We shared a final brief hug. It wasn't romantic. It was respectful. A goodbye that felt right. The last confrontation came unexpectedly as I was gathering my things. Felicity entered, clearly looking for me. "I have to ask. You something?" she said immediately. "Please be honest." "All right," I said. "Did you take this project because it was connected to us?" "No," I said plainly. "I didn't know the connection until after the contract was signed." "And once you knew, you didn't think about stepping away?" "Why would I?" I asked calmly. "I was the best person for the job. That your family might benefit is beside the point." She crossed her arms. "So it's just a coincidence? That you reappeared 1 year later, on a campaign linked to us?" I smiled. "Life doesn't usually tie itself up that neatly, but yes, it's coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences that convenient." "Then what do you think?" I asked. "That I spent an entire year crafting a new career in a new city just to end up on this one project? That I did it, all thinking about you?" The words hit their mark. Felicity blinked, processing the idea that she hadn't been the centerpiece of my decisions. "At that barbecue," she began, softer now.